So today we're looking at the cosmic balance. And I was thinking about what to talk about, wondering what to talk about, and then I remembered that I had run across this picture, this painting. The 6th century painting of Jesus is located in St. Catherine's Monastery at Mount Sinai, Egypt. An interesting feature of the painting is that each side of the face is different enough to make a viewer think of two people rather than one. According to commentary, the illusion was intentional. The artist was depicting both the humanity and the divinity of Jesus. Have any of you seen this particular painting? I hadn't seen it or heard of that idea, but what you do is you, on your computer, what I've done on my computer is cut that picture in half and make copies of both halves, flip them around where you can mirror the two images, and here's what you come up with. So you get two very different looking people. And I don't know which one is the divine and which one is the human. The guy on the right looks kind of questionable, so that must be the human. He looks like somebody you wouldn't really want to either buy a used car from or meet in a dark alley. But the guy on the left looks a little sad, so I don't know about him either. But anyway, it's interesting that they would think that way and actually paint that way back in the 6th century. And I don't know if this was a style. I couldn't find the actual artist. Couldn't find who did it, but he's the painting. Apparently, you can see it in the monastery. But it's been an endless discussion. This discussion concerning Jesus' humanity and divinity has gone for centuries. Some think he was God. Others think he was a man with godlike powers. There's one very important thing that is always left out of this discussion/debate, and that is the rest of us. It's like we're focused on this man because we made him something different from us. But I have said for quite a while, in fact, it was one of the things I focused on in my book, The Complete Soul, is if Jesus is to be relevant to us, he's got to be one of us. He has to be what we are. And maybe he's an advanced edition, but we don't really know where he was. I think he was. I think he was had a great insight into human being. But what the debate that's going on doesn't include us. It's all about him. And that's kind of very telling about what most of us have grown up in is we have to have that Jesus element, that we are not even in the picture unless Jesus is. But I don't think that he bought into that, frankly. I think there's enough evidence to show us otherwise. What theologians are debating is the nature of an image of Jesus put forward in the Gospels. Jesus is no more represented in this contrived image than he is in the painting. The more I get into this, the more intriguing it is to me that the mainstream Christian teaching is based on an image that probably did not exist. And of course, that is blasphemous to say something like that. But the painting that we're looking at, nobody knew what Jesus looked like. In fact, people that would describe people of that era would describe somebody that looks very different. Someone with short, curly, black hair, short beard, and never would look like a European, of course, because he wasn't a European. But the paintings that we see of Jesus, if we just think about it, now if I just showed you that painting without saying anything and I said, "Who is this?" you would know instantly who it was. And yet if Jesus actually walked into the room the person that lived, some 2,000 years ago, and I said, here he is, you'd say, that's not Jesus. Doesn't look anything at all like him. I think that would be our reaction. And so when a person like me would say Jesus was a Jew, he was a mystic, he was a gifted teacher and a healer. If you think of that image, that's quite different than Savior that came to save us from our sins and will return and, accompanied by an army of angels and all of this. The picture most of us have of Jesus is a larger-than-life presentation, but it is no more real than a painting, the image that we see in a painting. And so some of us feel when we hear something like that, like Mary when she visited the empty tomb, they've taken my Lord, and I know not where they've placed him. We may feel a little bit lost. We feel lost until we realize that whatever he demonstrated, he was one of us. He was a human being that had awakened to his divinity. But you have a divinity. You have a connection with the infinite. We are all expressions of the infinite. And if there's any difference between someone like him and someone like us, it's difference in awareness, not in capacity. And that's a very important idea to get hold of. We are the same divine expression that Jesus probably was. And this is speculation because we don't know what Jesus actually accomplished. We don't know where his consciousness was. I think we can find out. I think we can find it is the study I've been doing and sharing with you in learning to identify passages that would have come from one with mystical awareness. And mystical awareness is simply the awareness of the presence of God. When I read certain lines attributed to him, I can tell that whoever said that knew their spiritual connection. They knew their connection with the infinite. And it's becomes obvious. And when I read something like, if you don't walk the straight and narrow, you're not going to make it to heaven kind of thing, that doesn't strike me so much as what a mystic would say as it does an evangelist. The writers. There's several other things that are interesting. There's the belief, and I've shared with you that I think John, or the Gospel of Mark was probably a collaborative effort. It was written by a group of people. And I have no supportive evidence for that. It just feels like, because of the importance of that document, to get it right, to get it like they wanted it, that it wouldn't just be one person sitting down and telling the story of Jesus. It would be a collaborative effort. And they may have had a scribe doing the writing, but you had an editorial board, standing around saying, let's include this, and not talk about that. There's also the belief that John, the Gospel of John, was put together by a school, not by an individual. And that idea has been around for a long time, so that it's not like it's without precedent. But the reason that would matter is because we are getting an invented presentation of Jesus. We are getting the Jesus that they wanted us to get. The gospel writers were not interested in passing on the body of teachings that Jesus actually presented. They were passing on the body of teachings that they had come up with, that they had based somewhat on the teachings of Jesus, but they made him into something that I don't think he would have recognized. They put him in a role that I don't think he would have accepted. And again, there's evidence to support this. They tried to make him king, and he rejected that. And when you think in terms of Jesus when he lived, he was not thinking Christian. Christian terminology had not been invented. There was no talk like that at all. The Messiah was the anointed. It was a term that was used around kings and prophets. And so they tried to make him king. They tried to Christ him. And he rejected it. So there are indications there that he didn't go along with the painting that came up of him afterward. They're just things that seep through. And if we learn to see those things, we can see how the sayings would have been changed or brought into alignment with what the writers, not Jesus himself, were trying to say. So it's a very important distinction to make, and it is maybe difficult for us to, a lot of people won't read the Bible because they feel it's too complicated. It doesn't make any sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because we have two paradigms going on. We've got a paradigm of oneness. That would be the belief that we're one with God, that we're not going to be punished eternally, as I talked about last week. That we are like the fathers of the prodigal son. We are always welcome in the presence of God. And then there's the other side that is, you're a sinner, you're born in sin, you must be saved from your sins, and all of that. It's two paradigms. One based on the paradigm of separation. God's there, we're here, the kingdom will come someday. Or there's a paradigm of oneness. It doesn't come by observation because it's within you. That's a totally contradictory statement to the mainstream thinking. So when you see those, they jump out, and people read that and they say, well, how can a loving God condemn us to hell? Well, a loving God can't. But one that is invented by the church can. And that's what we have to keep in mind. Jesus taught a loving God. The church taught one that you better walk the straight and narrow. Join this group or else. That's the thinking. And it's by and large the thinking still of today. So we struggle with that kind of thing, and that's why we won't sit down and read the Bible. We may read books that use the Bible, people that select verses and put them out to our liking, and that's very understandable. It helps us see things from a different perspective. But I like to know why that's okay to do that. And it's okay to do that because that's exactly what the writers did. They took sayings of Jesus and they invented the story. I told you it's like a playwright, a script writer. They write a story and they get this actor and say, you're going to play the role of Jesus and here's what you're going to say. And so that's what we have. We have Gospels according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, not according to Jesus. And actually, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those names were not put on till the 2nd century, somewhere in the middle of the 2nd century. Nobody knows who wrote them. Okay. So in all cases, the literary and artistic imagery put forward is intended to set Jesus apart from common people. There is sufficient evidence to indicate Jesus himself would not have approved. He was drawn to the common people. I think that's why they responded to him, and that's, again, one of these contradictory things we can get out of the Gospels, out of the stories, is it appears that the very intellectual folks, the religious professionals, did not like him. It was the common people that he could speak to. and they could understand what he was saying. Who I think he was a person who on his own became illumined through quiet meditation, through going alone, because that was a practice that even comes through in the Gospels, that he would often go alone and pray. And that indicates to me that he was going alone to be still and learn his relationship to God. And I think he learned it because he referred to God as Father, which would be an endearing term. It's like if your son asks you for a loaf of bread, you wouldn't give him a stone. Or if he asked for a fish, you wouldn't give him a serpent. God doesn't give us things we don't ask for in this regard. God is absolute good, infinite spirit that is centered in each one of us. In the mind of a person like Jesus, it's like a father. It's a providing presence. And that's a very different view than if you don't do all 600 and some acts, that the Jews would practice, that you're in trouble. And this is why Jesus kept getting in trouble, because he wouldn't wash his hands. He would eat on the Sabbath. He would go out in the field and eat, or heal somebody on the Sabbath, or whatever. You're not supposed to do those kinds of things. And he broke several of the rules. So some people think he abandoned Judaism, but he didn't. He was a Jew from day one, and he was a Jew to the end. But he questioned some of the beliefs. And that's what you and I do. And so these things seep through these writings, but we have to understand the writings, the Gospels, were not produced by Jesus. They were not produced by anybody close to Jesus. They were produced, the story of Jesus circulated for about 40 years after he was crucified. And what was put down in the Gospel of Mark, the first Gospel written, was probably a solidification of that story, that oral tradition that had been circulated. That's why I think it was a group effort, not just one person. It was a group effort that was aware of what was being said about Jesus. And it was put out at a time when the Jews were under severe persecution. Jerusalem had been burned to the ground along with the temple, the center of the Jewish universe. And they needed a message of hope, and that's what Mark provided. Jesus is going to return and fix this problem. But I don't think Jesus taught that. First of all, he grew up in a relative time of peace. So I think the mystical teachings, the go to your inner room and shut the door and pray to your Father who's in secret, that would appeal at a time of peace more than at a time of war. Because at a time of war, the appeal would be, take up your arms and follow me. So it's a very different landscape from when Jesus lived. They say it was one of the most peaceful times that he grew up in, of all times there, because there's always something stirred up. And the wars were bloody. There's been estimates that up to 500,000 people were killed in the clashes between Jews and Romans. And the Romans didn't fare much better than the Jews. They won, ultimately. But the Jews killed a lot of Romans, and they would attack the Roman citizens and just wipe out innocent people because they were Romans. Anyway, it was a very bad time, and this came after the life of Jesus. So Mark came on that scene. Jesus was alive during a very peaceful scene. They would have gotten the mystical message a lot better during the time of peace than they would during the time of war. But Mark wanted to assure people that the Messiah is coming as a warrior and is going to fix this problem. And so people responded to that. Okay. So all people are spiritual beings expressing through a human body. A man like Jesus, apparently fully aware of his spiritual nature, expressed this understanding when he said, "The things I do, you can do as well, and greater things." Jesus struck the cosmic balance between his human and divine natures. Helping others do the same was the heart and soul of his ministry. And I think that's absolutely true. That's what he taught. You're like me. What I'm doing, you can do as well. And what I'm doing, I am so excited about it that I want to share it with as many people as possible. And I will do it through conventional means. I will do it through unconventional means. But what I want to give to you is what I'm experiencing myself, because it's possible for you to experience it as well. And when he said, "The things I do, you can do also, and greater things," I don't think he's talking about necessarily healing people or raising people from the dead or things like that, and multiplying loaves and fishes. I think it's the awareness. The awareness I have, you can have also. The awareness I have of my oneness with God. You can have that also, and even a greater awareness. He said, because I go to the Father, that's my secret. As I go to my source, you can do it as well. So our brain shuts off, when we start thinking that way, because we're taught that he's different. He's something different than us. But if he's different from us, of what value is that? It's sort of like Meister Eckhart was saying, kind of addressing this same thing. I may have a rich brother, but what good does that do me if I'm poor? He was not liked by the church. They condemned him as a heretic because he said things like this. He put himself and all people at the same level of Jesus. He saw him as a master, as a great teacher. But if I have a rich brother and I remain poor, of what value is that? In other words, he's saying that what Jesus taught is accessible to all of us. And I think that is exactly right. So the best window of the soul, on the soul we have, I think, is near-death. The near-death research provides the very best window currently available into our true nature. People who experience direct exposure to their soul are profoundly affected. So this is why I think it's important. Let me share this. This is P.M.H. Atwater. And I've been in touch with this lady, actually, and I said, "What's your name?" "What's your first name?" She said, "PMH." I said, "Okay, PMH." And that is. And she's got periods after it. My first name is the letter J, and there's no period after that, so it's just the letter. So I explained that to her, but she's got 3 of them. But anyway, she's a foremost researcher, and she was speaking in Houston, and this is some of the stuff that they printed for her. Those who have had a near-death experience must process and integrate this life-changing event into what usually becomes a new and unexpected path. It is not uncommon for this to take 7 to 10 years to fully embrace and become comfortable with a reality shift of this spiritual magnitude. What we're saying here is there's something in us that most of us have not yet touched, but it is obviously real, because when somebody touches it, has this experience, it takes them 7 to 10 years to work that into their thinking, how to incorporate that into their life. There's something in us at this very moment that if our mind opened to it, it would blow our minds away. It would redefine us. It would confuse us to the point, because what we would experience in ourselves is something so vast, we can't put it into words. And we can't really talk about it because there aren't too many people that have made this breakthrough. What I'm saying is Jesus tapped into this part of himself. I believe that he tapped into this part of himself. And he was trying to tell people, you've got this also. And that's what the near-death people are saying. They're saying it to all of us. There's nothing to fear. You're a lot more than you think. And yet when they try to explain it, they can't put it into words. Jesus couldn't put it into words either. That's why he spoke in parables. That makes perfect sense. When you're trying to describe a dimension that exists in us already, and the people we're talking to haven't experienced it, how do you describe it? You say something like, well, it's sort of like your normal thinking is like an old wineskin. You've got to get new wineskin and think differently, or it's like a mustard seed. A very small idea, but it will grow into the greatest part of your consciousness, your awareness. You'll redefine yourself from a greater context. And I think this is what Jesus was doing. He struck that cosmic balance. He found it. I am a spiritual being going through a human experience, but I'm not the human side. I'm going through it. And so when these near-death experiencers, and I would recommend this book that she wrote, The Big Book of Near-Death Experiences. I've got it. I've had it for many years, and that's why I contacted her. She says that you can actually have a near-death experience during your birth and not remember any of it. But you will have effects all through your life. You'll be very interested in near-death research. You might involve yourself in a career of service. The things she pointed out, I felt like I can relate to that. And I had a traumatic birth. I lost a twin. I had a twin that was actually delivered 3 months ahead of me. And my mother went through a very difficult time having me. I don't know if I had a near-death experience, but some of the things that she described, so I wrote to her and I said, what do you think? And she said, well, buy my other books. And tried to sell books. But she's all over the YouTube, so, take a look at her. And she's probably in her 80s now, I'm guessing, I'm not sure, but very prolific writer and thinker. She had 3 near-death experiences herself, I think in her 20s, and like within 2 years. So she's not a believer, she's a knower. And you can tell the difference always in people that have actually been to the place they're talking about. So imagine this, it takes 7 to 10 years for a person to process a minutes-long glimpse into their true being. I do not believe the thrust of Jesus' ministry was to call attention to himself, which is what the mainstreamers are doing. I believe he was trying to help the common people strike their own cosmic balance. And so that's quite a different way of... See, if you listen to someone who has had a near-death experience, they don't put themselves generally on a pedestal, like, I've got something you don't. They will say, you may not understand what I'm talking about, but it's for good reason, because we probably won't. But I think that's the same thing Jesus, same place he was coming from. He had an incredible awareness of who he was at the deepest level, and he was trying to tell people, the common people, you've got this too. And it's not like the Judaism that you're familiar with, although there's nothing wrong with that. We don't want to throw that out, because there's a level of it. If you understand your own spiritual nature, you'll see a level in these teachings that make more sense to you. But that, to me, is what it means to strike the cosmic balance, to find the cosmic balance, is to understand that there is something in us that is so profoundly different from what we have come to know, and yet it is knowable, it is accessible, and it's here now. And it is what we are. All right. So I was asked to talk next week about spirit, soul, consciousness. What else? Those three things kind of describe what differences are there, and it's a very good topic. And there is a lot of confusion around those ideas, so I'll do that next week. So thanks for coming out. Stay dry and don't get hit by lightning. Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. If you'd like to help support this ministry, just click the donate card at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Your financial support means a lot to us. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. To subscribe to this channel, simply click our logo. Thanks again for your interest in independent unity, and have a wonderful week.